Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin with Bangladesh again. Their court has refused to ban ISKCON. The Yunus government called it a Hindu fundamentalist organization. They insist that Hindus are safe in the country and accuse Indian media of running what they call an industrial-grade disinformation campaign. But can they deny the images coming out of Bangladesh of college students stomping on the Indian flag? We'll show you what we're talking about. Meanwhile, in India, the latest GDP numbers are out. They're lower than expectations. We will discuss why. In the Ukraine war, Putin has responded to reports that say that the West may give nuclear weapons to Kyiv. The Russian president has issued a warning. We'll tell you all about it. Also, about the new Russian missile that is being called unbeatable. Why Georgia and Romania are seeing mass protests after elections. How Canada is snooping on Indian diplomats. Why Chad has told French troops to get out of the country. Why Australia has banned social media for children under 16 and whether it's a move in the right direction. What's the story of Black Friday sales and the history and the hype. And why a new cafe on the Korean border is making waves where you can sip a latte and get a view of North Korea. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Syrian rebels enter the second largest city of Aleppo after clashing with government forces on the city's edge. This is the first time the Syrian opposition has attacked Aleppo since 2016. The fighting that began on Wednesday has killed at least 250 people. Iran holds nuclear talks with Europe as tensions rise. Talks in Geneva include Britain, France and Germany. Iran says it could end the ban on possessing nuclear weapons if sanctions are reimposed. Both sides seek to break the nuclear impasse before Trump's return. Ireland goes to polls in a tight election race. The three main parties are neck and neck in the polls. The cost of living crisis dominates the campaign as Ireland struggles with a severe housing shortage. France offers the world a look inside the restored Notre Dame Cathedral. It was heavily damaged in a horrifying fire in 2019. Since then, Paris has spent $73 million on renovating its Gothic jewel. The cathedral will officially open to the world on December 7th. And global wine production hits its lowest level since 1961. It is down in almost every country of the European Union. France's output sinks by almost 23%. Climate change and bad weather are being blamed for this. The pressure is building on Mohammed Yunus, both from within and outside. This week, he picked a fight with ISKCON, a global Hindu organization that runs temples. There was even talk of banning ISKCON. Yunus's officials called ISKCON a religious fundamentalist organization, but now they've made a U-turn. Mohammed Yunus's press secretary has spoken out. He says there is no plan to ban ISKCON. He also says Hindus are perfectly safe in Bangladesh. Then what about the violence in Chattogram? What about the reports of riots? Apparently, it's all misinformation peddled by Indian media. Listen to this.
We have no plan to ban any religious organization. Religious group has their freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and all their religious rights. We don't have any plan. There is a huge information gap in India. Like obviously you are flooded with misinformation. What we can see from here is there is an industrial scale misinformation campaign like originating from India.
Classic strategy there, shoot the messenger. We are not plucking out stories from mid-air. Our numbers and accounts are from Bangladeshi sources, like the Bangladesh Hindu Buddhist Christian Unity Council. It's a non-profit group in Dhaka. They reported more than 2,000 attacks on minorities, more than 2,000 attacks in 4 months. Is this too disinformation, misinformation, whatever he's calling it? If it is, why hasn't Dhaka taken action? You see, it's easy to blame the media. It's harder to crack down on radical Islamist mobs, which brings us back to ISKCON. A ban may not be on the cards right now, but several people linked to ISKCON are being targeted. Some 17 bank accounts have been frozen, all of them linked to last month's Hindu rally in Chattogram. Among the 17 is Chinmoy Krishnadas, the Hindu priest who's been charged with sedition. You may remember the accusation against him. Apparently, he placed a saffron flag over Bangladesh's national flag. He has denied the charge. Of course, you cannot insult the Bangladeshi flag in Bangladesh, but here's what you can do. You can insult the Indian flag in Bangladesh. Don't believe me? Take a look. Those were colleges in Dhaka and Noakhali. Did you see what's painted on the ground there? The Indian tricolour. Students were stomping over it repeatedly. These pictures have been coming to us for the past few days, but we are showing them only tonight after verifying through local reporters. They say all of this is indeed happening in Bangladesh. And we are not saying that Yunus and his regime personally orchestrated any of this, but they did create an atmosphere conducive to it, where attacking India is fashionable, where targeting Hindus is revolutionary. India has not responded to these pictures, but it has expressed concern at the ground situation.
I would say that India has consistently and strongly raised with the Bangladesh government the threats and targeted attacks on Hindus and other minorities. Our position on the matter is very clear. The interim government must live up to its responsibility of protecting all minorities. These developments cannot be dismissed only as media exaggerations.
ISKCON has also hit back. Listen to what their leader in Bangladesh said to this. We want to make it clear that ISKCON Bangladesh has no involvement whatsoever in the ongoing protests. The lies have now reached such an extent that even road accidents are being falsely portrayed as part of ISKCON's conspiracy. It is true. That's how absurd things have become. And Yunus has no intention of fixing it. Even as Bangladesh burns, he is more focused on Sheikh Hasina, on punishing the former Prime Minister. This week, Mohammad Yunus met the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC. His name is Karim Khan, the same official who charged Netanyahu and Putin. Yunus wants him to prosecute Sheikh Hasina. Remember, she already faces a trial at home in Bangladesh, but Yunus says, let's try her at The Hague as well. After all, it's not like he's preoccupied with stabilizing a country in chaos. Yunus already has a problem of misplaced priorities. He needs someone to jolt him to reality. He certainly won't listen to the Indian media. But what about his beloved Western media? Well, most of them are silent on the attacks against Hindus. Some are actively downplaying it. Look at this survey published by Voice of America. It's a US state-funded news platform, VOA, Voice of America. Here's what the survey says. 64% respondents found Bangladesh safer for minorities under Yunus. And this got us thinking. The numbers don't match the sentiment. So we dug deeper, and it turned out that this survey covered only 1,000 people, 92% of whom were Muslims. I guess this is the sort of reporting Mohammad Yunus likes. Not industrial-level disinformation, industrial-level cherry-picking. Most Western leaders are silent on this issue. Only a handful of lawmakers have spoken up. Maybe it's an awareness issue. Maybe it's by design. Either they don't care about Hindus or they care too much about Mohammad Yunus. I won't be surprised if it's both. And it wouldn't be a first for them in Bangladesh. Let me take you back to 1971, when they did the same thing. Pakistan was unleashing a genocide on Bengalis. American diplomats in Dhaka reported these atrocities back to Washington. It later came to be known as the Blood Telegram. Do you know what the US did then, upon receiving this blood telegram? Nothing. They ignored the atrocities because they supported Islamabad. Today, Islamabad may not be in the picture, but Western politics still is. Now let's talk about the Indian economy. It appears to be slowing down. After years of rapid growth, it is hitting a speed bump. Fresh GDP numbers are out and they do not paint a good picture. In the last quarter, India grew at just 5.4%. That's a two-year low. In the previous quarter, the growth rate was 6.7%. So this is a sharp decline. It's also well below expectations. Economists had predicted a 6.5% growth rate for India. What about India's Reserve Bank, the central bank? It was aiming for 7% growth rate for the entire year. Now that target appears tough. So what happened here? What explains these numbers? There are a few signs of distress. For starters, wages in urban India have contracted. This impacts the middle class directly. Their incomes are shrinking, and it's showing in consumer spending. Even on items like food, the middle class is cutting back. Citibank recently released a statement, an assessment. It says that there is a sharp slowdown in household spending and that consumer spending fell to a two-year low this month. Again, why is this happening? The report says it's because people are earning less, so they're spending less, even on the basics. They've cut down on the spending. And leading companies are feeling the pressure because of this. Like Maruti Suzuki, India's largest car maker, Bajaj Auto, the top seller of motorcycles, Hindustan Unilever, India's biggest FMCG company. FMCG means fast-moving consumer goods. All these companies have reported weak earnings. They are worried about low demand from the middle class. So that's one area of concern, the financial distress in the middle class. The second worry is government spending. This has been a slow year. Government spending is a major driving force for the economy. It creates jobs, which has a trickle-down effect on the rest of the economy. But this year, the government spending target was $132 billion. In the first half of 2024, just 37% of this budget had been spent. And the reason is the general election. India held the national election this summer, so several projects had to be delayed. Because governments, cannot launch major projects during election time. It is seen as a violation of the Model Code of Conduct. Big announcements can also influence voters, which leaves a government with two choices. You can either start major projects before elections are announced or wait until they're over. Now, India's general election was over in the month of June. That's when the results were announced. But the spending is yet to recover. The government needs time to reboot the projects. In fact, officials had warned about this. A statement was issued recently. It said the government may, and I'm quoting, the government may undershoot its spending target. So these are the two big reasons: shrinking income of the middle class and slowdown in government spending. Some key sectors have also been sluggish, like manufacturing and services. But it's not all bad news. There are some positive signs as well. Spending in rural India is starting to pick up. The recent festive season would also help. We'll see the results in the next quarter numbers, perhaps. Consumer spending by Indians was strong. Autumn crops have also been healthy, so farmers are expecting a bumper harvest. All this could help the Indian economy bounce back. The RBI is optimistic. It has kept its growth projections unchanged.
In recent years, the global economy has gone through a period of continual and unprecedented shocks. Global trade is projected to remain higher in the current year than the previous year, notwithstanding the sanctions, the tariffs, import duties, rising cross-border restrictions, and supply chain disruptions. Emerging market economies have shown greater resilience than advanced economies in the current phase. Amidst these headwinds and contradictions, the Indian economy is sailing through smoothly, powered by buffers like strong macroeconomic fundamentals, stable financial system, and resilient external sector.
So the RBI's growth forecast remains unchanged. The bank has a critical role in reviving India's economic growth. It has to manage inflation, which has been consistently high. Last month, food prices surged by more than 10%. As a result, the RBI kept interest rates high, and it is unlikely to lower them anytime soon, not until inflation is under control. Because high interest rates means expensive loans. So people borrow less, they have less cash in hand. This keeps inflation in check. Now, India's challenges mirror the global trends. Major economies worldwide are slowing down. In 2024 and 2025, the world economy will grow by less than 4%. If you compare that with India, India is still performing much better. Even with these numbers, India is among the fastest growing major economies in the world. Our next story is about the Ukraine war. We've seen a lot of escalations over the past 2 weeks. Ukraine started bombing Russian territory with Western weapons. Russia responded by launching a new missile, a ballistic missile called the Orishnik. This missile strike took Ukraine by surprise. It had no defense against the Orishnik. So the West is now scrambling to protect Ukraine. US President Joe Biden is sending more aid, a $725 million arms package. But that won't worry Putin. He's confident about his new weapon. He says there is no answer to the Orishnik missile. At the same time, he has drawn one clear red line.
If the country with which we are currently engaged in military operations becomes a nuclear power, what should we do? In this case, we will use everything. I want to emphasize this. All the means of destruction at Russia's disposal. We will not allow this.
That was a stark warning to the West. If they give Ukraine nuclear weapons, Russia will obliterate the country. But why did Putin make this threat? Is the West really giving nukes to Ukraine? A report to this effect has been doing the rounds. It came out last Thursday, the day when Russia launched its first Orishnik missile. This report sent alarm bells ringing in Moscow. Let me read the operative part. It says several officials even suggested that Mr. Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent. Apparently, some Western officials have come up with a dumb idea: giving Ukraine its nuclear weapons back. Some quick context. Ukraine used to be a nuclear-armed nation. Up until 1996, Ukraine was once a part of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991. Its nuclear weapons were given to 4 successor states: Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. So yes, Ukraine was once a nuclear-armed nation. We don't know exactly how many nukes they had. Estimates range from 1,900 to 5,000 nuclear weapons. Now let's just take the lower estimate, 1,900. And also look at the nuclear-armed countries in the world today and the estimated number of nukes that they have. The US and Russia obviously on top with more than 5,500 each. Then comes China with 500, France has 290, the UK has 225, India 172, Pakistan 170, and so on. What do you notice here? Ukraine was believed to have had 1,900 nukes some 30 years ago, and that was a lower estimate. But that's still more than almost everyone today, barring the US and Russia. In fact, Ukraine had more nukes than most other countries put together. It had the world's 3rd largest nuclear arsenal, but the country chose to give them all up. So did Belarus and Kazakhstan. All of them gave their nukes to Russia in exchange for security guarantees. This was part of a deal known as the Budapest Memorandum. It was signed in 1994. That's when Ukraine's denuclearization began. Now, fast forward 30 years, and what do we see? The West is talking about giving Ukraine its nukes back. And just to be clear, this is according to one report that said It was anonymous Western officials who suggested this. They made the suggestion to President Joe Biden. There is no indication that Biden will listen to them. He should definitely know better. But in case he's getting any ideas, Putin made sure to shut them down with his warning yesterday. Putin has threatened to use nukes before in this war. We keep hearing about it every few months, but this time it is different. If Ukraine gets even one nuclear weapon, then Russia loses its edge. It puts Russia in an existential crisis because you don't need thousands of nukes to level a city like Moscow. One will do. And that is why Vladimir Putin will never allow Ukraine to get a nuclear weapon again. So nukes are the talk of the hour, but Russia believes it doesn't even need nukes. It has another mega weapon, the Arishnik missile. It's supposed to be unbeatable. No air defenses can take it down. At least that's what the Russian president claims. Moscow fired this missile at Ukraine on November 21st, and now Putin has threatened to hit Kyiv with it. He says this new missile is as destructive as a nuclear weapon, but without the radioactive contamination. So what is this missile? And can it be a game changer in the Ukraine war? Our next report tells you.
It's called the Arishnik, meaning hazel tree in Russian. It's a new intermediate range ballistic missile, IRBM. Moscow never publicly mentioned it before, but now this missile is dominating headlines. Why? Because Russia fired it at Ukraine last week, and now it threatens to hit Kyiv with the same missile. Moscow fired the Arishnik for the first time on November 21st. This missile, carrying 6 warheads, hit Ukraine's Dnipro. The damage was limited, but the missile itself has raised alarms. Russian President Vladimir Putin says it is unstoppable, that air defenses can't intercept the Arishnik.
I have already said these are quite powerful elements, which are heated to a temperature of 4,000 degrees. You can look on the internet. The temperature on the surface of the sun is 5,600 to 6,000 degrees. It is comparable to the temperature on the surface of the sun. It has a kinetic impact, a powerful impact. It is like a meteorite falling.
The Arishnik is hypersonic. That means it travels at least 5 times the speed of sound. It can also maneuver mid-flight. That makes it harder to track and intercept. Putin touts it as some great new weapon, but this is what the West has found. The Pentagon believes it's based on the RS-26 Rubesh intercontinental ballistic missile. It was capable of carrying nukes. Moscow tested it multiple times, yet it was never deployed. An examination of the debris shows that this new missile was derived from that. The missile itself was launched from Kapustin Yar, which is about 800 kilometers from Dnipro. It reached a top speed of 13,600 kilometers per hour. There wasn't much destruction, but Moscow compares it to a nuclear weapon. It says that this new weapon is just as destructive, but it doesn't carry a nuclear warhead or spread radioactive contamination.
The missile can hit even highly protected and deep-lying targets. According to military and technical experts, in the case of a massive group use of this missile, that is, several areas at once in one strike, the power of this strike will be comparable to the use of nuclear weapons. Although Orishnik is of course not a weapon of mass destruction.
Russian media is obviously celebrating this. Many are calling it the next big weapon. Reports suggest that Russians are even naming their children after the Arishnik, but the West remains skeptical. Ukrainian military experts even say that there is nothing called the Arishnik, that this is just another modified intercontinental ballistic missile.
If the weapon were inherently terrifying, he would just use it. But that's not quite enough. He's had to use it, and then he had to do a press conference, and then he had to do a second press conference to say, hey, this thing is really scary.
New or not, the Arishnik is less about military prowess and more about scaring Ukraine. Kyiv is the capital of the war-torn nation. It's already very well protected, and since 2022, it has withstood many strikes. But the talk of a new missile has still caused alarm, and that is Putin's motive here. Russia is already making gains in the battlefield. It has Ukraine scrambling for aid and weapons. Putin hopes that chatter about his new missile can tip the scales in his favor.
Let me tell you a story from 1787. The United States was finalizing its constitution. One of the key players in this process was Benjamin Franklin. As he exited the Constitutional Convention, he was surrounded by curious citizens. They asked him, "What form of government are we getting?" Franklin replied, "It's a republic, if you can keep it." And that last part is very important. It's also integral to our next story. The heartbeat of any democratic republic is elections. Everyone gets a vote, someone wins, someone loses, and the winner goes on to form a government. This process is the bedrock of any democratic republic. But that same process has led to violence and confusion in two countries, Romania and Georgia. Let's look at Georgia first. Its capital, Tbilisi, was rocked by violence. Today, hundreds of people hit the streets in protest. They were opposing a recent decision by the ruling party. You see, Georgia is an aspiring European Union member. It's actually written in their constitution. But the ruling party has decided to delay it. They have postponed the EU accession talks to 2028. Look at what happened next. Riot police were deployed, water cannons and pepper sprays were used, and dozens of protesters were arrested. But how was it related to elections? Well, Georgia held its parliamentary vote last month. The ruling party ended up winning again. That's the Georgian Dream Party. They've been ruling the country since 2012. But not everyone is convinced. There are reports of voter harassment and manipulation. So the European Union stepped in. Their parliament, the European Parliament, passed a resolution yesterday. It declared that this election in Georgia was not free or fair. It also called for a rerun. Basically, they want fresh elections in Georgia. Of course, this riled up the ruling party, which is why they have delayed EU talks to 2028. Now, this goes beyond domestic ideologies. This is a strategic tussle. Georgia's ruling party is pro-Russia, and these protesters are pro-EU. So the election and its fallout is a battle for Georgia's future, its identity as a country. Now let's turn to Romania. Similar protests were seen in their capital, Bucharest. Hundreds of people flooded the streets. They were protesting against a far-right presidential candidate. Take a look. Now, some background here. Romania voted on Sunday and the results surprised most people. A far-right and pro-Russia candidate emerged as number one. His name is Călin Georgescu. He won 23% of the vote. And why did that surprise people? For starters, he did not even have a political party. He contested as an independent. Plus, the opinion polls did not give him a chance. Yet, on Sunday, he was the big winner. Immediately, people started blaming TikTok, because that's where Georgescu did most of his campaigning. TikTok is accused of amplifying his presidential bid. Reports say fake accounts promoted his campaign on the platform. And there is no evidence at this point, but Romania's top court has now stepped in. They have ordered a recount of Sunday's election. It's Romania's first recount since the Cold War. Again, the European Union is involved. They want TikTok CEO to appear before their parliament, the EU parliament. They want him to explain what happened here. Of course, Russia is also a suspect. Most Western weapons enter Ukraine via Romania. So the West is keen on a pro-Ukraine regime in Bucharest. But like we said, Georgescu is pro-Russia. Moscow has rubbished the claims of interference.
The Russian side did not interfere in the electoral processes in Romania. We do not generally have a habit of interfering in elections in other countries, in particular in Romania, and we do not intend to do so now.
2 countries, 2 elections, 2 controversies. For the sake of symmetry, I'll make 2 points. Number 1, some of these issues are genuine. TikTok has been accused of meddling in elections before. It is on brand for them. Similarly, ruling parties have also been caught rigging elections before. None of this is far-fetched. That's point number 1. Point number 2, there is some willful ignorance at play here. A cherry-picking of which election to recognize and which to rubbish. Think back to what happened in Pakistan. We had videos of fake ballot papers being dumped at counting centers, yet the same European Union did not call for re-election. Yes, Pakistan is not Romania or Georgia, but shouldn't the same principles apply? You can't conveniently question results when a pro-Russian candidate wins or when your side unexpectedly loses. And this applies to countries all over the world. If you have doubts, trust your own systems to handle them, to sort out any discrepancies. Do not undermine the foundation of your republic. Canada is at it again. The Trudeau government is provoking India again. It has put Indian diplomats in Vancouver under surveillance. The methods are invasive. The Canadians are engaging in audio and video surveillance. Even private communications of Indian diplomats have been intercepted. Remember, these diplomats already face a hostile environment in Canada. In the past, Khalistanis have targeted them by releasing posters with their pictures. And now the Canadian government is spying on them. India has lodged a strong protest over this surveillance. New Delhi says this is a direct violation of diplomatic norms. But, as usual, the Trudeau government seems indifferent. Here's a report.
India-Canada relations have hit a new low. The Trudeau government has been spying on Indian diplomats. This week, the Ministry of External Affairs informed the Parliament about this. Diplomats in Vancouver were placed under sweeping surveillance. Both audio and video monitoring was carried out. Even the private communications of diplomats wasn't spared. Canadian spies intercepted and tracked them. It's a troubling new chapter in a relationship which was already under considerable strain. India has lodged a strong protest against this surveillance. Earlier this month, a note verbal was issued to the Canadian mission in New Delhi. But the snooping hasn't stopped. The MEA says the Indian diplomats in Vancouver remain under surveillance. New Delhi has repeatedly called on Canada to secure Indian missions, but those appeals seem to have fallen on deaf ears. Indian consulates have been refused security. Take the case of India's consulate in Toronto. They plan to host a community outreach camp. Such events are a common affair for Indian missions worldwide. They are used to extend some consular services and make an outreach to the Indian diaspora. But in Toronto, the Indian consulate couldn't go ahead. Canada refused to provide security for the camp. These events have become targets for extremists in Canada. This month, a consular camp in Brampton was targeted. The Indian mission in Canada issued a statement about it and accused anti-India elements for engaging in violence. Even Justin Trudeau issued a statement. He called the violence unacceptable. But words alone offer little reassurance. Canada has been difficult turf for Indian diplomats to operate in. They have been constant targets of Khalistani extremists. In the past, they have put up posters and billboards with the faces of Indian diplomats endorsing violence against them. Now the Canadian government is engaging in surveillance of Indian diplomats. It makes their environment even more hostile. In October, New Delhi had virtually downgraded its ties with Canada. It had recalled its High Commissioner to Canada along with 6 other diplomats. New Delhi had also expelled 6 Canadian diplomats, including Canada's acting High Commissioner. Back then, India had said it has no faith in the Trudeau government. The surveillance would hardly reassure New Delhi. This relationship will continue to remain hostile for the foreseeable future.
Now let's look at France. It's had another setback, this time in Central Africa. Yesterday it lost its last remaining base in the Sahel region. It has been asked to get out of Chad. Chad is a country in Central Africa. It was once a French colony like a lot of other African nations. Chad became autonomous on 28 November 1958 and it became fully independent 2 years later in 1960. But the 28th of November is still a special date in Chad. It marks an important step towards freedom, which is why Chad chose yesterday, the 28th of November, to break with France again. Their government put out this notice. It terminated a defense agreement. The agreement allowed France to deploy troops in Chad. But now Chad has torn it up, which means French troops deployed there will have to leave. There are 1,000 French soldiers deployed here. They will have to start packing up soon. But how did this happen? What led to this? Look at the timing. The French foreign minister has just concluded his visit to Chad. He met with Chad's president, Mohamed Deby. We don't know what they discussed, but right after that meeting, Chad tore up the defense pact. Their foreign minister said, and I'm quoting, France must now also consider that Chad has grown up, matured, and is a sovereign state that is very jealous of its sovereignty. It's an understandable reason why should Western powers station their troops in former colonies. Imagine if the British left thousands of soldiers in India. If British troops remained here decades after India's independence, it wouldn't have been acceptable to us. So we do understand wanting to guard sovereignty, but this is only one part of the story. There are 2 more. To understand the second part, we need to zoom in. France had many colonies in Africa. Let's show you a belt stretching from Chad all the way to Mauritania. All these former colonies hosted French troops. They were all part of a security grouping called the G5 Sahel. All these former French colonies were dealing with a common problem, terrorism. That was France's justification to deploy troops. But they failed to fix the problem. They failed to contain the terrorist groups. So slowly the African nations started getting annoyed. 3 of them recently had coups: Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. Their militaries overthrew the civilian governments and then they kicked out the French troops as well. These coup-hit Sahel nations blame France for their terror problem. They say the French troops were not doing enough. And ordinary people seem to agree because anti-France sentiment has been brewing in the Sahel. It's prevalent in Chad as well. And this may have contributed to the government's decision. The third and the last reason for this break may have been Russia. Moscow has been courting African nations, especially former French colonies. Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have all switched allies. They kicked out the French and they brought in the Russians. Russian mercenaries to help the military juntas. And Chad has a similar situation. President Mohamed Deby is the son of a military dictator. His father, Idriss Deby, ruled for 30 years. Mohamed took over after he died. He orchestrated a coup and then held what is called a questionable election to consolidate power. So Deby may also want some Russian support to shore up his legitimacy. Russia has been reaching out to Chad. They've signed a few deals and a broader alliance is definitely possible. All these factors have influenced Chad's latest move: the desire for sovereignty, the anti-France sentiment, and the desire for Russian support. Chad was France's last stronghold in the Sahel. Now it has fallen. And France's troubles may not be over yet. There are rumblings from another former French colony, Senegal. Senegal's president has also taken aim at French troops. He says their time is almost up. So it looks like things will get worse for Paris in the days to come.
We've got your back is our message to Australian parents.
We've asked a question repeatedly on the show. How do we regulate social media for children? How do we protect children from harmful content? Well, Australia has tried to answer this question. Their parliament passed a legislation on Thursday. It has banned social media for children under 16. They cannot use the likes of TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. I guess that's one way to go. Forget regulation, ban the whole thing. Australia is the first country to try something like this. Their Prime Minister says it is all about protecting kids.
Platforms now have a social responsibility to ensure the safety of our kids is a priority for them. We're making sure that mums and dads can have that different conversation today and in future days. We've got your back is our message to Australian parents.
Big tech obviously is not happy. They're calling this law vague and concerning. Meta says it was rushed through without weighing the evidence. But what about the people of Australia? What do they think? Polls show 77% Australians support this law. But some people on the other side do make valid points. They say it's a free speech issue. They ask why the government is getting involved at all. Shouldn't parents decide what's good for their children?
I don't think it's a good thing, really, because I think that it's not going to stop it, and also the government's taking control of things that is parents' responsibility. Because parents are going to keep still using their social media, aren't they?
I mean, like, not to sound like an old fart, but when I was a child, it was my parents' responsibility to not police, but like, you know, enforce what I was doing and like make sure that I was not, you know, exposing myself to any harm. And I think that maybe a government intervention is probably unnecessary on such a wide scale.
The law has certainly triggered a debate, and not just in Australia. People in Europe are weighing in too. So are people in Latin America and Asia. On that front, great job by the Australian government. They have certainly triggered a conversation. But beyond that, there are two questions here. One, how do you enforce this law? And two, were bans really necessary? This law is expected to be enforced in late 2025, but starting January, there will be a trial. A number of approaches are being considered, like biometric verification, selfie verification, and document verification. Rest assured, kids will try to fool these tests, so the system will have to evolve. The onus is on social media platforms to uphold this ban. If not, they face fines of up to $32 million. And let's be honest here, it won't be easy to enforce this ban, which brings us to the second question. Is banning a step too far? Frankly, it's not a yes or no question, because for starters, what is the alternative? A lot of experts used to suggest content moderation, removing harmful stuff from social media. But how many platforms have actually done that? If you look at X, the opposite is happening. Regulations have been relaxed instead of being tightened. But let's assume that you ask big tech to behave, to filter content for kids. Most of these companies are based in the United States. Their CEOs are trying to be best buddies with the incoming US president. Why would they listen to your government? Chances are they wouldn't. So decisions like these have to be judged based on context. And right now, that means two things. One, social media is harmful for children. Multiple studies have confirmed that beyond a doubt, whether it's disturbing sleep patterns or affecting attention skills or impairing social skills or decreased academic performance. Most doctors also agree with this. Social media is bad for children. And number two, we haven't had one viable solution. So it's easy to sit around and criticize Australia's ban, but what other options do we really have? If big tech voluntarily cleaned up its act, this wouldn't be necessary. And don't get me wrong, we're not saying that this ban is a perfect answer. We're saying it's worth a shot. As for the free speech argument, let's give it a break. More than half the world doesn't have that freedom anyway. So I'm sure Australia's democracy will do fine without 15-year-old keyboard activists. But I will say this. Canberra is putting itself under a lot of pressure. Succeed or fail, this law will go down in the history books. And we say implementation will define its legacy. If you're perpetually online, you already know what day it is. It's Black Friday. Open any shopping website and they have the same words screaming out in different colors. Sale, sale and more sale. Black Friday is marked every year on the 4th Friday of November. That's the day after Thanksgiving. There are frantic shoppers, crowded stores, millions of online orders and the satisfaction of getting a good deal. That's what Black Friday is about, or used to be about. But how did it come about? How did it become so popular? And most importantly, is it still an unmatched deal? Let's look at the history first. The origin of the term itself is surprising. It was coined in 1869, not for holiday shopping, but for financial chaos. That year, 1869, two Wall Street speculators caused a gold market crash. So the US economy slumped. The day was dubbed Black Friday. Its association with shopping came much later. In the 1950s, in the US, it was the day after Thanksgiving. Thousands crowded the stores. They waited in endless lines on the streets. There were traffic jams. There was shoplifting. The day turned into a nightmare. The local police nicknamed it Black Friday. Then businesses tried to rebrand it as Big Friday, but the original term stuck. So in the 1980s, retailers finally saw an opportunity to transform Black Friday's chaotic image. They wanted to paint it as a day of profit. So they spun a new story. Listen to this. They said this was the day of profits, of financial turnaround for your business. So if it's in the red, if it's making losses, it will move to being in the black, hence Black Friday. It was complete hogwash, but it worked. It resonated with consumers. And thus began a mighty retail apocalypse. For years, people camped outside stores, elbowing each other in crowded aisles. Who cared about dignity when the washing machine was 50% cheaper? As the world moved online, so did the deals. Sales came on the 14-inch screen, and customers could not hit checkout faster. Humanity may not need another air fryer, but how can you resist if it's 40% cheaper? Who would miss a deal that's too good to be true? Well, not to play the shopping Grinch here, but that may not be the case anymore. If you look at any other time of the year, 98% of these products can be found at the same price. If you check 6 months before, it could even be cheaper. Because, and you already know it, 30% of Black Friday deals are artificially inflated. Prices are jacked up to make discounts appear bigger. And the worst hit items are the tech accessories. Take headphones, for example. Prices are hiked by 21% before Black Friday. Same for watches. There's a 15% rise in prices. As for laptops, there is a 16% markup. So if you think you're getting a good deal, well, think again. And all of this raises just one question. Is Black Friday even worth the hype anymore? The rise of technology has changed our shopping habits. Earlier, we used to shop a few times a year. Now people do it all the time, monthly, even weekly. The rise of fast fashion fueled this trend, and retailers were only happy to join in. In the past, Black Friday was about one day. Now it's a month-long phenomenon. Retailers extend their sales to avoid in-store chaos. So the event has lost its exclusivity. Also, we have sales throughout the year. For every festival, every event, there's always a sale, which makes Black Friday just another sale. Critics say this is leading to overconsumption and waste. And this conversation of overconsumption has spawned a whole new trend, like a buy nothing day, a day to reject consumerism altogether. We say you can take your pick, or go completely old school and say that it's just another Friday with the promise of a weekend. No spectacular discounts, no buyer's remorse. In the world of instant gratification and endless deals, that too sounds like a steal. How do you like to enjoy your coffee or tea, if that's what you prefer? Whatever your beverage, how do you usually unwind with your drink? Maybe while relaxing on the balcony with a book in hand, or maybe while watching some TV, while getting your daily dose of news. But can you imagine sipping your coffee while staring at your mortal enemy? Taking a huge gulp while staring into enemy territory? Well, Starbucks has just made that possible for South Koreans. The global coffee chain has just opened an outlet at the DMZ, the demilitarized border zone between North and South Korea. So South Koreans can now drink expensive brews while gazing at impoverished North Korean villages. It sounds a bit dystopian, but the store seems to be a hit. Here's our report.
Look at the inside of this Starbucks outlet. It doesn't seem like anything out of the ordinary, right? It looks like any other Starbucks that you would find in New York, New Delhi, or anywhere in between. But this outlet is located in the city of Gimpo, right at the border between North and South Korea. The crowd isn't really there for the overpriced coffee, it's there for the unusual view, the chance to look into North Korea. South Korea and North Korea are technically still at war. The all-out fighting stopped back in 1953 with an armistice, but the war never formally ended. So, as you can imagine, the two Koreas don't really share close ties. The people are kept apart because of the geopolitical tensions. North Korea in particular doesn't want any contact with the South. The government led by Kim Jong-un recently declared South Korea an enemy state. He even abandoned Pyongyang's long-standing goal of reunification with the South. So you could say that ties between the two nations are at an all-time low. This makes people-to-people connections near impossible. But apparently not for multi-billion-dollar global coffee chains. Starbucks saw an opportunity, a chance to exploit the disconnect and turn it into profit. It opened the Gimpo branch at the DMZ so South Koreans can lament their war-torn society while sipping frappuccinos.
I heard Starbucks was opening at Ajabong, so I woke up at 4 a.m. This feels really different from when a Starbucks opens in our usual neighborhood. I wanted to be here early and make the first order. As I sip this delicious coffee, I wish I could share this tasty coffee with the people living in North Korea, right in front of us.
All that sorrow, heartache and nostalgia means big bucks for Starbucks. They aren't the only ones profiting. The city of Gimpo has high hopes from this new outlet.
People used to think of this area near the North Korean border as a dark and gloomy place. But now that Starbucks, with its global marketing power, has opened here, this place could now become an important tourist destination for security and peace that can be seen as young, bright, and warm, as well as garnering global attention.
The mayor of the city is hoping the new store attracts tourists, and other South Korean border towns have the same idea. They want to capitalize on North Korea's reputation of being a hermit kingdom and offer a glimpse into Kim Jong-un's fiefdom. It might sound cynical, but it offers South Koreans a chance to connect with their estranged brethren. Now, if only they had the option to do that with some normal-priced coffee instead.
Much of the world is struggling with one issue: how to make weddings cool again. Governments are throwing money at couples just to get them to walk down the aisle. Not India, though. In the next 60 days, the country will witness 48 lakh weddings, generating a total business of 1.6 lakh crore rupees. Log on to any social media app right now and it's like the algorithm is mocking you. Every third post is about a wedding. A choreographed Sangeet reel, a couple sharing their story, or a Bollywood-scale production for a happily ever after. It's left many on the internet wondering, does their soulmate even know how to swipe right? Take a look. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Donald Trump marks Thanksgiving with his family and Elon Musk at Mar-a-Lago. NASA astronauts enjoy a zero-gravity Thanksgiving feast on the International Space Station, and New Yorkers brave the rain for the annual Thanksgiving Day parade. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1952, newly elected U.S. President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower headed to Korea. It was part of his campaign promise. He sought to break the stalemate in the Korean War. The visit forced him to aggressively pursue peace. By July 1953, the Korean armistice was signed. We are leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Our crew up here just wanted to say happy Thanksgiving to all our friends and family.
So we've got a container here of all the things that we're going to enjoy on Thanksgiving. It is a feast. Let me see. We've got Brussels
sardines,
Brussels sprouts, butternut squash, apples and spice,
smoked turkey,
and smoked turkey. It's going to be delicious.
It's true we have much to be thankful for. On a professional sense, I mean, there's not.
Her Thanksgiving debut, everyone's favorite sweet and signature yellow heels, and she is dazzling her millions of fans along the way.
And I don't know if you know this, Savannah, Minnie just had her first, been on quite a tour through New York.
Yeah, and of course he has his back to take in the views and spread some of their...
And cheering him along the way.
Yeah, swinging in style and back in the parade after more than a decade, it is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
With his iconic red and blue suit, this amazing balloon is based on legendary...